Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the author of book-length work, both fiction and nonfiction.
I'm Molly Jo Riley, producer of the podcast, The Unemployment Cookbook, the upcoming mystery location novel, NOLA. What did I say? Mystery location?
Mystery location. I believe you
thought
did.
I said vacation, and I'm like, there's something so wrong about that, but I have vacation on the brain.
Well, hey, I mean, vacation murder mysteries would be kind of cool, too.
There you go.
It's like...
Go down to the Bahamas and don't come back till the trial is over.
It's like Murder, She Wrote. Wherever that woman showed up, somebody died.
Yeah.
She goes on vacation in your town. You better just go. Just get out.
Right.
It's not safe.
Right. You can have my house. It'll be empty for a while now.
There you go. Well, a reminder to those of you listening to the audio-only podcast, you can watch us live every other Tuesday in the PM, 6:30 Pacific Standard Time. Of course, you can always in the chat at aarongansky.com/firstsinfictionlive. You can watch us on YouTube at your convenience. I know some of you are, especially East Coasters, probably going to bed right about now. So you can always watch us the next day. If you do watch us on YouTube, we ask that you click subscribe. Helps us out quite a bit. And also give us a thumbs up if you don't mind. That also helps out. I like seeing your comments, seen some comments coming through on some of our casts lately, and I appreciate that. So we always welcome comments on the YouTube page as well. I think that's about it. Otherwise, if you're in the chat room, there are those links at the top that you can click on to share the fun with your writer friends and have them join us. Did I get everything, Molly?
You did. Yes, I think you did.
All right. Oh, I guess I should also say I'm the author of Heart's Song. That's my newest release. I don't know if I even mentioned it on this podcast, did I?
No, you did not. Well, 2 weeks ago, I think so, because of the launch.
Maybe in passing, yeah. So new novel is out called Heart Song. It's a rock and roll romance. Make sure you go to Amazon.com and give that check that out. It's got a solid 5-star rating right now with both reviews. So it is a good book, though. So here we go with our topic for tonight. We're going to do our Ask the Author from Bill Giovannetti. I think I'm saying that right. Giovannetti. Yeah, I think I got that. He wants to know, what are your tips for writing great dialogue? Now, a wonderful question. It's a fairly common question that I get as a writer, and there's not an easy answer. The dialogue is really trickier aspects of writing fiction. It can be one of the more challenging aspects. A lot of people think it's easy, and my mantra is it's very easy to do poorly. It's very difficult to do well. And we tend to think that because it's easy to write dialogue that we're writing good dialogue, and that's just simply not the case. The easier it is, the worse it likely is. Not true in all cases, but there's usually a correlation there. So rather than take 22 minutes or 40 minutes to talk about this, I just want to reference some of the previous podcasts that we've done on the issue. You can always go to aarongansky.com and just search dialogue. Got a little search bar now, and you can just search that up. It'll pull up all the topics that we've done on dialogue, and you can get some more specific information. But just real quickly, you said you wanted some tips, top tips. Mine is always this: less is more. I think I may be in the minority here, but my rule has always been use it as little as possible. And the reason I say that is because I think, again, we tend to rely on it too much, myself included, and it just becomes very easy to just start writing a screenplay rather than writing a novel. And so I try and use it as little as possible. I really challenge myself. Is this necessary in this phrase? Can I get away with the phrase instead of a sentence? How do I whittle this down? Once I've whittled it down as much as possible, then I'm usually a little bit happier with it. But just understand that overwriting, especially in dialogue, is fine on the first draft. But in the second draft, that's where you want to roll up your sleeves and really, pull out the X-Acto knife and get to cutting. The second rule that I would say is characters should never say things to other characters already know. This becomes very awkward, and it's a way of trying to put exposition into dialogue, and it's very unnatural. And you have characters saying things like, "How's your mom? You know, the one dying of cancer." Well, number one, without getting punched in the face, and number two, it's just awkward and stiff, and it really sounds unbelievable. It comes across as unbelievable. So find a better way to do that. Usually it's just something as simple as, "How's your mom?" And then somebody else can say, "Chemo's awful." And we know everything that we need to know just from that. And that's just as opposed to, you know, half a paragraph there. So that's what I would say. Less is more, and don't have characters say things to characters who already know it. How about you, Pops?
Well, I certainly agree with that last one. Contrived dialogue is horrible and really stands out like a sore thumb. I'm not sure I agree with the less is more, because, and a lot of people don't realize this, is dialogue is action. We think that there's narration and action and dialogue. Dialogue is action. It's people talking. And you can reveal a great deal about your character. So I like dialogue. And I think most of the books that I've read that I've really enjoyed, I don't want to say they're heavy on dialogue. They've always struck a balance. But they use dialogue when it's necessary and where it's necessary. And then they don't overdo it just to fill the page. And usually you can see that with new writers, is they're wanting to, you know, get their 3 pages in for the day or whatever it might be. And so they use a lot of dialogue, because dialogue fills the page really quick. So I think I would go with that, as just use it when it's proper. So my top tips are really this. It's just, first of all, is to remember the purpose of dialogue is to make your character sound real. They're going to talk like people. They're not going to talk like Shakespearean actors unless they're Shakespearean actors and living at that time. So listen to how people speak. Become a student of that. Keep your ear open if somebody has an interesting accent, uses some unusual terms. I was thinking there's been a cooking show on that just ended, next Food Network Star or something like that. I think that was it. And the guy that won it is quite the character, and he's from the South, and he uses all these, and I think some of them are just kind of made up. He was sort of like I say, a characterization. But he would make things that would make him very memorable, and it worked very well for him. You know, that's so good it'll make your tongue want to slap your brain out. You think, well, what did he say? And the point is, it worked very well because you begin to fixate on him. And the same thing with characters. You use their dialogue if they have special things they say. Or if they're from special areas, you know, they have regional speech. Pay attention to that. In California, people really do say "dude." Some don't think that. They do. Dude. I hear it all the time. Southerners have their way of speaking, so become kind of a student of that. You know, it's like a musician listens to how other people play and different types of music. Same thing with dialogue. That's the writer's music. And the dialogue should reflect the history and the education of a character. And I've used this illustration before. Stephen King wrote Dreamcatcher, I think it was, where he did this. He had a ensemble cast that had a wide range of education to no education, and the way they spoke was very different. You could tell who was speaking without being told, without an attribution, because of the language they used. So dialogue should reflect the history, the education of the character. Highly educated people tend to phrase things differently than those who have little or no education. So be true to the character, and then again, remember dialogue is action. Someone is doing something and it advances the story. If your dialogue isn't advancing the story, if it's treading water, then you want to cut that out.
That
Absolutely.
is really good. I saw the Food Network Star, and when you were talking about it, I was thinking, oh, that's probably, I can't remember his name, but then you said Food Network Star, so we're on the same page there.
Yeah, he's quite the character. Yeah.
Yes, and I wish I could remember some of his sayings, but it was like you said, you're looking at it and you're like, I don't even know what I heard, but it makes perfect sense coming out of his mouth.
Well, the one he'll never live down is he won something right towards the end, and he whispered, "Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit."
Yeah.
I cannot get that out of my head.
No.
Every time I see him, that's what I'm going to think of now.
It's just traumatizing. It's definitely traumatizing. Well, I think great dialogue includes non-dialogue action. We don't stand dormant when we're talking to each other, so neither should your manuscript. Add action such as, she took a sip of coffee before answering, or how are you really doing? He raised his eyebrows. Make sure the reader understands the tone and who's speaking. And then if a character is angry, you can have them growl before responding or ball their fists while speaking. Just add more to the entire atmosphere. That for me makes great dialogue.
Yeah, using action tags instead of dialogue tags can be beneficial as well. One of the things that does is it adds a break in the cadence and the rhythm of the dialogue. And Pops, you said that dialogue is kind of the music of the writer. I like that. There should be some sort of cadence or rhythm to it. I know I said I wasn't going to give a lot of tips, but you kind of got me thinking, Molly, when you said great dialogue includes non-dialogue. You said non-dialogue action, but I was also thinking non-dialogue. One of the best tips about dialogue I've heard is that talking, but it's also about people not communicating. And so having people speaking at cross purposes, having people in arguments, they're often not even arguing the same thing, and distracted, and maybe they're not paying attention. Hemingway was perfect at this. Hills Like White Elephants is a great study for dialogue. If you really want to know how to do dialogue well, Hills Like White Elephants is something that you can really take a look at. Carver, I think, was really good at it too. Maybe that's why I like less is more, is because I just really appreciate the minimalists. I'm not sure, but for what it's worth, there's a couple extras.
Yeah, Rex Stout, I love his work. He was a master at this because he has what amounts to Sherlock Holmes and Watson, except of course very different characters, in Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, and they're very different people physically, but you really hear it in the way they speak to each other. The terms that Nero Wolfe uses is they're very cerebral. Archie Goodwin is right off the street, and those two could have a dialogue. You would never have to use a dialogue tag or a beat. Again, that's the action that we were talking about a minute ago, a beat. You wouldn't even have to use any of those. You could tell by just the way they structured their sentences and the way they spoke who was doing the speaking. So that's just masterful. He's a good one to study for that. Rex Stout.
Yeah, absolutely. So there it is, in a nutshell, dialogue in a nutshell. I hope that's helpful for you. Bill, thanks for sending those questions in. If you've got an Ask the Author question, you can send that to aarongansky.com. I've got a little contact form there, or of course you can find us on Facebook or the Twitter, and hit us up that way. And we try and get back to you fairly rapidly, but sometimes if you contact us through aarongansky.com, I'll get you an answer pretty quickly, but you may have to wait for it to be on the show because of a little bit of a backlog. But that backlog is diminishing. So now would be the time, if you want a quick turnaround on your answer to see it on the show, now would be the time to submit some of those Ask the Author questions. So even if you already know everything, ask the author on behalf of a friend. Just be like, I have a friend, hypothetically speaking, with a hypothetical question, and then we'll give you a hypothetical answer.
Or because if there's somebody who does know everything, they can ask and see if we know.
Just if you just want to make sure that we know what you already know, yeah, go ahead and ask those questions. I'm sure we get those a lot.
Knowledge. Like, do we measure up to their standard of authoritative authors?
I'm sure Bill right now is just listening to our tips on dialogue going, what do these guys know? Stephen King's watching and laughing at us right now. I'd be okay with that. If Stephen King watched our show and then just laughed at me hysterically, I would be totally fine with that. Stephen, if you're watching, laugh. So, and also come on our show and tell us how much we don't know. But anyhow, let's go ahead and move into our topic tonight. Everything that you wanted to know about writing, but you were too afraid to ask. We should be able to cover this in about 2 minutes. It might take a little bit longer. You guys are a well-educated crowd, but Pops, this is a topic that you proposed, and you got a little story to go along with it. So what's the story behind this particular episode?
Well, one of the things you first realize is once you become a writer, people will have questions about what it means to be a writer. And I've noticed in my life there are two types of people, two reactions when you tell someone you're a writer. One, they'll look at you and say, so you can't get a real job. That's the one. And the other is they'll ask, have I read anything you've written? I have no idea what you've read, so probably not. I don't know. Sometime back, I was still fairly early in my writing. I was maybe 4 or 5 books in, something like that. And I was writing for Zondervan. Zondervan is a division of Harper Row. And Zondervan called all their fiction writers in, and they brought us all up to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they sat us down in this hotel, and they fed us. And so here I was, and it was exciting for me because I was sitting with a lot of famous and best-selling authors. And so as far as I was concerned, this was a graduate course for me. No matter what we did at Zondervan, these people had stuff to teach me. And so I would ask questions. And I have found that most people who want to be writers or they are writers, they have the same questions. And when you get writers together, they'll do that. They'll exchange these kinds of information. So that's what we did. We sat in the lobby one time. We stayed up late. We told stupid jokes and asked a bunch of questions. So I wanted to know how Terry Blackstock did things. I wanted to know how some of the others did what they did. And, of course, it was interesting to me that there's no uniformity in it. There's different ways of doing things. It really pertains to your personality, and that's going to be probably the one proviso I'm going to put in all of this. We're going to talk about things, but you have to work the way you're wired. There's no one right way. What matters is getting the thing done and sit off. That's what matters. And so if you're a late night writer, great. If you're an early morning writer, whatever works for you in your situation. So one of the questions I wanted to ask, and I've been asked this 1,000 times now, is about writing schedules. People are fascinated with how much time a writer spends on their craft. And sometimes we're amazed to really to the point of disbelief at how some writers work and how some don't. For example, Isaac Asimov wrote 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And he spelled Isaac Asimov wrote 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. He often would not even do interviews. The media would call and say, can I send a reporter over? And he goes, no, when am I going to write? If I'm talking to you, I can't write. If I'm on the radio with you, I can't write. You're taking my writing time. He's very protective about it. And he was pretty much housebound. He wasn't housebound. He just chose to live in his fictional world in his apartment. Not all of us can do Isaac Asimov 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's the reason he, I think, holds the record for the most books written. Faulkner said he did the same thing. William Faulkner and Hemingway called him a liar, said it couldn't be done. So obviously Ernest Hemingway didn't write 8 hours a day. Stephen King has written that he writes about 4 hours a day, every day but 4 in the year. So 4 times a year he has a day off from writing. Other than that, he writes 4 hours a day every day. So you see some kind of trend here. There's just a lot of discipline. Dean Koontz, in one of his early writing books, get those if you can get them. They're a little outdated, but they're nonetheless collectible. Dean Koontz has confessed to spending 3 nights awake to meet a deadline. Didn't want to miss his deadline, so he didn't sleep for about 3 nights. So that's producing a lot of work. I talked to Jerry Jenkins, the Left Behind series, among many, many other things. He's written a couple hundred books, but best known for the Left Behind series. And he said that there are times when he'll write 50 pages in a day. 50.
That's crazy.
But he looked at me when he said that, and he goes, now you understand, that was a very long day. Okay, so we're not talking an 8-hour day there. We're talking probably an 18-hour day or something like that to do that. And probably, again, prompted by a deadline. 50 pages a day. Angela Hunt, who I worked with in the Harbinger series most recently, bestseller, she says she has done 30 to 40 pages in a day. Now, I understand that's not every day, but has reached that level. For anyone interested, my best has been 24 in one day, and it was the last 24 pages. That's the only time I can write that many pages in a day because I know everything that's going to happen.
Wow.
Since I'm primarily an intuitive writer, so 24 has been my maximum, and I don't do that often. So what I would say is depending on my schedule or if I have a deadline, but I've been comfortable to try to get 3 or 4 pages a day. Normally I can do 3 pages in an hour if I know what's going on. If I don't, then it might take me all day to do 3 pages. But I'm comfortable with that. And so you want to do a little math here to show how this works?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. It's all about the math. I've been saying that a lot lately. Some people get discouraged when they think about the fact they're going to write a book, and let's say it's just going to be a traditional book, and they're thinking 350 pages or 100,000 words, 90,000, 100,000 words. That's just impossible to do. It's not. It's the old, how do you eat an elephant? And how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Yeah, it's the same thing with writing. You write a book 1 page at a time, 1 word at a time. So if you write 2 pages a day, 5 days a week, that's 10 pages in a week. So in a month, that'll be about 40 pages per month. I round down. There's 21 and a half days per month on average. But there's always going to be a couple of days when you just can't write anything. Something comes up. So figure 40 pages a month. So that means you've done a book in about 8 months. 40 pages in 8 months is, 320. Is that math right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's about 320. So 8 months, maybe 9 months. So you can do a book a year easily, 2 pages per day. And if you're an outliner, you know where things are going, or you've thought far enough ahead as an intuitive writer to do this. If you're good at the keyboard, you can do 2 pages in half an hour. You can go that quickly. When I'm really pushing it, I try to do a page every 15 minutes. I'm talking about a manuscript page, you understand. Double spacing and stuff. But I try to do one every 15 minutes. Do I make that every time? Sometimes it's taken me an hour to do a page, but you get the idea. So the math now is just going to move kind of quickly here. 3 pages per day. That's and you do say you work 6 days a week, so you puts in some time on a Saturday or something. 18 pages a week, 72 per month. So you got a book in 4.5 to 5 months. So you can do 2 books a year. That's 3 pages a day. 4 pages a day, 5 days a week. That's 20, 80 in the month. So a book in 4 months, you're writing 3 books a year, and on it goes. So most people can write 2 to 3 pages an hour if they know where they're going. There's going to be times when that will seem unreachable. But even at 1 page an hour, it would only take 2 hours to meet a daily goal.
Yeah, Pops, you're giving us a lot of really good information here, and I was going to comment a little bit on kind of your backstory and asking authors these types of questions. I think there's, I don't know if it's a competitive spirit, but I think especially as a new writer, there's always that question of, am I doing it right? Here are these other authors who have done countless books, won so many awards, bestseller lists, those types of things. What are they doing differently than me? What can I learn from them? And I love that about the writing community, that we still seek to learn things from other people. The situation that you've described at Zondervan is very much what we experience at writers' conferences, especially at Blue Ridge, where we still get those conversations, some pretty lively ones, especially if you and Stephen James are in the same room. And somebody says 3-act structure, and then everybody hides under the couch. It's a lot of fun.
Grenade! 3-act structure.
Yeah. So down. But it's you bring up some good things in terms of the writing schedule and how many pages people write. I've done 50 pages in a day. None of them were good. Not a single one of them. But I got them done. They were terrible. Normally, I think my best in terms of published works, I think maybe 15 to 20, and that's a very, very, very rare occasion. I'm happy if I can get 5-6 pages in a day. I've had days where I've done 10 and I've been really happy about it. But like you say, it's usually toward the end of the book when I know where I'm going. I've had a lot of time to think and plan. Usually my goal is just 1,000 words a day. And over the summer, I'll do a little bit more than that because I'll have more available time. During the school year, I'm lucky if I can carve out an hour or two to write, and I diligent enough to actually carve that time out. But sometimes I don't make my 1,000 words in an hour, and then I feel depressed and saddened for a day, and then I go back, and the next day I'll try and do 1,200 words to try and make up for it, or whatever the case may be. So sometimes it's 1,000 words a day, sometimes it's 5,000 words a week. It really depends on my project and deadlines and things of that nature. But one of the questions that I would have is simply when are you putting those words on the page? And I think this is where we come back to the idea that it's going to be up to you. What works best for you? I had to get up early. I didn't want to sacrifice time with my family, so I had to write before they were awake because I could function at 4 a.m. I could not function at 11 p.m. I can't even function at 9 p.m. I'm lucky to be able to do this podcast. That's past my bedtime. That's just the way my body has always worked. And so I don't mind getting up early, but some people, they need to sleep in till 9 or 10 in the afternoon, I guess. But,
Jerry Jenkins, when his kids were small, he was an editor for a magazine, and he would come back and then he'd spend time with the family. And for his books, he would start writing after everybody went to bed, which means he was writing into the wee hours of the morning. So he'd put in his full day, spend time with the family, and then he'd try to put in 2 or 3 hours after everyone had gone to bed. Then he'd go to bed. So yeah, it varies. So if you're doing, you said 1,000 words a day, so you're getting what, 3 pages thereabouts?
About that, yeah. Yeah, about that. Mm-hmm.
If you're in a standard manuscript format, so you're double spaced, 12 point Times New Roman type, double spaced, you're going to get about 300 words a page. If you're doing an older font like Courier, a typewriter type font, you get about 250. If it's a lot of dialogue, it's 250. Okay, so you're thinking about, you're shooting for about 3 pages or so.
Yeah, and I find that I'm usually able to, if I stick with that consistently, maybe I put in a Saturday or two. My wife is a saint, and she'll occasionally take the boys out to go swimming or something, and that'll give me an extra hour or two to write, whatever the case may be. I usually clock in a good solid first draft in about 6 months, sometimes less. I've done it in as few as 3, but that's when things were really kind of moving.
I did a full draft in 6 weeks.
You did a what? Whole draft?
I wrote a whole book for one of the Strucker books. I wrote it in 6 weeks.
Good on you.
That's impressive.
Yeah, don't ask me to do it again. Yeah. I'm really only 35.
This is why we learn from you.
This is what happens to you when you do that. Well, it was because Jess Strucker was still active military, and my first conversation with him, he was in Afghanistan somewhere on a mountain. So time that everything got to me and the contracts were signed and stuff like that, I only had 6 weeks left.
Wow.
So, and what I did is I said, okay, this is how many pages I need to write to get to this word count. And that means I have to write this many pages per day, 5 days a week. And if I fall much behind, I'm going to be in trouble. And so you break it down into bite-sized elements.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's a good way to do it, because here's one thing that we're talking about that we haven't actually said very explicitly, and that is to set goals for yourself. I think that might be a good thing if you're a new writer. Just set some goals, realistic goals. Don't aim for 50 pages a day. That's unrealistic. But if, again, Pops, you did some of the math, maybe it's 2 pages a day, maybe it's 3 pages a day, maybe it's 1 page a day. Even if you did 1 page a day, at the end of the year, you still have a novel, 350 pages. 365 if you don't take weekends off, but you get the point. Setting goals for yourself is a really good thing to do, even for the professional writer, but especially for the new writer.
James Scott Bell talks about, I think he calls it the Fast 500. And that is, he gets up, he gets a cup of coffee, he sits down, and he does 500 words before he does anything else. Then he goes off and he does whatever he has to do that day, even if it's just to sit down and start writing again. But before he really gets underway, he tries to knock out 500 words. It's a goal for him. It's become a discipline. I think it's 500 words, but just right out of the bat. So that's going to be like a page and a half. Again, depending on how you set your page up, but it's going to be a page and a half, maybe 2 pages. to get that 500 words. But that's right, set a goal and then go after it. And I would add to what you're saying there, Aaron, is if this is new to you, you've not done this before, take a stab at it. Say, okay, I think I can do 4 pages a day. And you find out you can't. That's okay. There is no right or wrong way. Back it off to 3. Back it off to, you can get something done 2 pages a day, knowing there'll be days where it'll be worse and days it'll be much better. Sometimes you can hit a streak in a particular set of scenes or something, and it just pours out. And then other times, it's like having your wisdom teeth removed. Just very difficult. So don't expect it to be the same every day, but yeah, do set those goals and test. And you're not being graded on it. It has nothing to do with your value as a human being. It's you trying to figure out what works for you.
I mean, Mama said there'd be days like this. There'd be days like this, my Mama said.
I'll have that on my mind all night. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Singing that.
So, yeah. Yeah, set those goals and take a stab at it. Like you say, Pops, figure out what works for you. And again, find your sweet spot, find your zone. And don't beat yourself up too much if you can't get 5 pages a day right out the gate. Most people can't. It always sounds easy. Oh, I could do 3 pages. That's really easy. And then you sit down and you try and do it, and you're like, actually, this is hard work. It's hard work. So give that a shot. Pops, did you talk with the other writers much about rewriting?
Yeah. And again, that varies. There seems to be just 2 or 3 different styles. One is to write a first draft. I'm going to use Angie Hunt as an illustration again. And she writes what I've always called a blast copy. And that is she sits down and she just goes to town. And if she gets to a part where she needs some information, but she doesn't know what it is, she just makes a note right in the manuscript. So look this up. Or if she gets stuck on something, to need him to say something witty here, puts it in brackets or highlights it so she can come back to it. She doesn't let anything slow her down, including missing information. So, and then she goes back and she does the rewriting, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's when she begins to flesh in the supporting a storyline, add scenes that came to her at the end of the book that she knows need to go to the beginning of the book, which she wouldn't have known had she not worked that way. So again, for her, it works to write as fast as she possibly can till she gets to the end, knowing that it's going to be ugly. But that's not the point. No one's going to read it. It's not going to be published. So in a sense, what she's doing is making a massive outline.
Very thorough outline, yeah.
With dialogue and everything. And then she goes back, and that's where the real writing begins. Now she brings in all her skills in the craft and the like. So that happens. Stephen King rewrites 3 times. Dean Koontz rewrites as he goes. He doesn't write page 2 till page 1 is perfect in his mind. That would make me nuts. I'm just not wired that way. Though I see the wisdom in it, I don't know if I could do that. Might be fun to try sometime. Some writers never rewrite, and we know what you call that. You know what we call that?
A first draft?
Yeah. Some writers never rewrite. Yeah, professional term for that is a mistake. Yeah, don't be arrogant. Every professional writer needs to rewrite, or they'll pay someone else to do it for them. Some rewriters will rewrite 10 times. Over and over again. I can't remember who it was. Was it Hemingway that rewrote the ending of one of his books how many times?
I don't know. I know Fitzgerald was making corrections to the manuscript of Great Gatsby up until they were printing it. He was still asking for them to make changes as it was going to press.
That's right. Yeah. So rewriting is, you're going to do it. If you want to be a professional, you need to learn to rewrite. And it's not like rewriting a term paper in school. As a writer, you probably love this. And rewriting is really one of my favorite parts. Now, I rewrite as I go. That is, I'll write a chapter, and I may write another chapter, and may write another chapter. Then I'll go back to the first one and start editing, fixing things up because it'll look fresh to me. And then I just have a little backlog I can do. So I do that sometimes. And then after you do enough books, I've done so many of these that I kind of edit just as I go along. I can recognize most of the problems, but then I go back and I let my computer read it to me, and I listen for mistakes. And that's always been really, really helpful.
How, when you do that, doesn't that get a little confusing because you don't get to see the punctuation or something? I mean, I know you're supposed to read it out loud to yourself occasionally, but when you listen to it by the computer, do you have the proper voice, or is it like just a technical monotone? How does that help?
No, I use one of the higher end voices, which you can get for next to nothing now. You get several good ones I know on Apple, on the Mac.
You hear that, Aaron? On an Apple.
And I don't know about Word. When I first started doing that, I was using Word, and I think I bought a voice. I paid a small amount, but I don't even know that you have to do that now. But I've not worked with Microsoft operating system in so long, I don't know what's going on with that. But no, I have it on my computer. I'm still writing, so I have the. I'll highlight a page and I can see it, and then I'll let the thing start reading, and I will hear mistakes before I'll see them. Or I'll hear a redundancy where you use the same word twice very close to each other, like the word introduction, and then 3 words later you use introduction again. That'll really pop when you listen to it. And so it's a little easier for me to recognize. So that's how I do it. I'm looking, so I've got visual aspect going on, and I got the auditory. I'm listening at the same time.
Got it.
Yeah, I in the bargain, I have a passage where it says the sun peaked between 2 peaks. I don't know. I don't know how that got past editors and my multiple drafts of that, and yet somehow that remained, and it makes me sad.
That's it. Yeah, you're dead to me now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about your typos in the next segment here.
Oh no, I got a whole notebook full of them. So.
Yeah. Balabolka.com, BALABOLKA.com. I've got it in the show notes. Is a good program. I want to say it's free, text to speech, and you can actually convert to MP3. So when I had a long commute, I would take my projects, especially if I hadn't written in a while, because I wrote some books in between Hen of Ed and I books, and so when I was coming back into the world, I wanted to listen to the previous books. I would just throw them into an MP3 and then listen to them on my phone on my drive home. Yeah, it's soulless text to speech, but it's fairly good.
That, by the way, is not necessarily bad. You don't always want an actor because you start listening to the performance. So if it has minimal amount of emotion in it, you're more likely to hear it. And if it's a little wooden, it's even better because you have to listen more closely to each word as it comes out. So I'm not saying get the worst possible voice. I'm just saying it doesn't have to, read like a professional reader, like an Audible book or something like that. You're not doing that. You're trying to find missing words, redundancies, mistakes, and it's another way to force you to look at your manuscript while you're rewriting it. And that works it's very well.
It's funny that you mentioned Audible because that's where I noticed the error in the bargain is when it was we had somebody read it for Audible. The book is available on audible.com and it's fantastic. We got the best guy for it.
Well, it's like Father Like Son. I was listening to a taped version of A Ship Possessed, and I listened to it while I was on the treadmill. And I'm very self-critical. I'd be listening and go, "Oh, that's not so bad. That's good. Oh, that's a good line. Oh, good description. What? Who wrote this garbage?" And I'd get all upset about it because there'd be one line or some redundancy or something like that. And yeah, it'll haunt you.
You would try to turn off the tape player, but it would always be just out of reach because you're on the treadmill, and you'd have to run faster to get to it. I get it. I've been there. I feel your pain, Pops. I feel your pain. Yeah, I mean, rewriting is absolutely mandatory, and for me, that's where the fun begins because that's when you start to hit the good writing, and that's the enjoyable part of the process for me. I enjoy the first draft too, but not nearly as much as the second draft. I now write the first draft. In the business, we talk about crummy first drafts. In the secular market, they use a different term. And the idea is that no first draft is ever going to be as good as the second draft. And really the first draft is, I mean, it's a rough draft called a rough draft for a reason. But if nothing else, it does give you the shape of the story it's going to take. Like you said, Angie Hunt does a very thorough outline. And that's very possible. Even if you do outline, the first draft is still needs to be revised. But typically, if you're a very good outliner, your first draft need to be revised less because you've put more work in up front. We've talked about the difference between outlining and discovery writers before, but I do find in terms of revision that outliners tend to revise less because they already knew where they were going to begin with. As a discovery writer, I have to do a lot of revision because a lot of my story threads end up kind of, falling out of the story, or I don't pull them all the way through to the end, or I was gonna say this and I never did, and that's where things kind of fall apart. But still fun to do. So rewriting is important. The other question that I think a lot of people have, especially new writers who've not been through the process of publication, what does that look like, Pops? Can you kind of just maybe run us through the steps of you sign a contract, now what?
Yeah, and it'll vary from situation to situation. So, you were with Lighthouse, and the way they process things is a little different than traditional. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share what is done in legacy publishers. Usually we just call them traditional publishers, ones that have been around a long time. And this process has been honed over the decades and will change some. Publishing is always changing. That was one of the real eye-openers for me. I didn't realize, I thought it was always done this way, all the way back to the ancient Greeks, but that's not true. It's changing all the time. So you sign a contract. Now, what's going to happen? Well, most likely if you've signed a contract, especially if it's your first book, you've written the whole book already. If you sell it on spec, which is what I did, I think after my second book, I didn't write a book unless I had a contract for it. But the first few I had to have written ahead of time. So you're going to write if you haven't finished it, or you're going to rewrite. And that's how the process works. You get your contract, and I got to go over it again and get it all spiffed up. And to help you do that, your editor is going to do a substantive edit. And what that simply means is they look at the big picture. You're using the same names for your characters. The plot is moving from beginning to end. There's setbacks. They're looking for all the big stuff that's going on in it. They're not worried about semicolons or whether or not you're using an in dash when you're supposed to be using an M dash. That just doesn't concern them at this point. They want the story right. That's what they're after. After it goes through substantive changes, it'll come back to you, and you make the changes that the editor has sent to you to address. And you address those. Sometimes you have to educate your editor, but most of the time the editor is right. That pains me to say that, but most of the time they're right. They're editors for a reason. So always, keep that door open. After that kind of edit, substantive edit, then you get into a line edit. Line edit, and this is usually what I do when I do editing. I do line edit, and so I'm rearranging words. I'm correcting whatever I see that a copy editor would catch, but I'm not doing copy editing. I'm doing line editing. I make sure it holds together. Do the sentences make sense? Are there too many redundancies? That sort of thing. And of course, when I can, I look for little things that change meaning. For example, I know a writer who meant to write the word bowl, but he put an E in it and ended up writing bowel. And the line was, Namui sat on the hot, dusty earth eating rice from a rough wooden bowl.
Oh,
and yeah, that was me. And my editor caught it.
Thank goodness.
On my Christmas list forever now, because there's no E in bowl. There is in bowel. And that's why you want to be edited. And then, Aaron, you mentioned yours. Sometimes the sun peaks between two peaks. A couple of hominids in there. And
yeah, sometimes the widow is enormous, stretching from wall to wall and floor to ceiling. And,
yeah. I did that one too.
And
I did a whole bunch of them like that. So that's why I like editors. I don't like being edited. I hate being edited, but I hate not being edited more. That's far more embarrassing. Yeah. So after they do this line edit for you, that comes back to you as the writer, and you go over those changes. And we'll send this to you. Now it's all done digitally. It used to be done on hard copy, and it's done in track changes, and you go through and see what they did. And sometimes they'll make mistakes, so you do want to go through it and review them. They usually will leave it up to you unless it's a glaring error or something they're going to get sued over. So you approve the changes, make whatever changes you need to, then they'll go into a final edit, and those are usually copy edits, and these are the people that are worried about semicolons and em dashes and n dashes and the way hyphens are used, and whether or not this is now a compound word when it used to be 5 years ago 2 words, and they will conform it to the style sheet of the publishing. So not all publishers have the same grammar rules. All the basics are the same, but whether or not you capitalize personal pronouns of deity, whether or not backyard is 1 word or 2, there'll be a house style for that. And once you go through that, you get to go over it yet again and look at that. And then what happens is it goes out, and then somebody will write you and say, hey, did you know that on page you made this mistake? Because there's always going to be something. The good news today is most publishing is not warehoused anymore. It's on demand. The technology in publishing has changed so much that they can make a change now, and every book that comes out after that will be correct. So that's a good thing now.
Good.
Back when I was starting, and they run 5,000-10,000 copies, and there's a mistake in it, well, they stay out there. They're not going to call them all back and then tear them up and then issue another 5,000 or 10,000 because you have a typo.
Yeah, the process from smaller publishers, and there's a lot of indie publishers just making use of Amazon predominantly, but also the Smashwords and things of that nature. The process with those is very much the same thing. It's very much the same thing. I've been lucky enough with the smaller presses to be able to be involved in the book or the cover selection process, and I've been blessed enough to have publishers who value the opinions of their authors, and so they listen to the feedback that I've given them on some of the book covers, which usually is, this looks great, but sometimes it's, I'm not a huge fan of this, can we change X, Y, and Z? And they've always been kind enough to work with me. In some cases, they eventually say, no, we're going to go with this instead. We think it's better, and they're the publisher, and that's fine. I typically will have to approve the interior design as well as the cover. Again, that's more of a courtesy on the part of the publisher. They don't have to get my approval for that, but they often will show me several samples of what the interior might look like. Really pleased with the way that the interior design of Heart's Song turned out. It was a interesting book in the sense that it combines, journal entries as well as emails and text messages and phone transcripts. So it's very kind of, I don't hate to use the term postmodern, but it's kind of a postmodern take on the epistolary romance. And I love the way it came out looking on the page on the inside. I thought they did a really fantastic job with that. So,
you bring up a couple things I left out. The cover is also part of the process. Mm-hmm. And most publishers will send you publishing designs. I've had them send like 8 different covers and say, which one do you like best? Not all of them do it, but covers can be important. And sometimes they don't get it because the guy doing the cover or the gal doing the cover may not have read the book. Usually you'll get a questionnaire. On the questionnaire, you'll give them little icons and images and stuff like that that might tell a little bit of the story. But these guys are doing covers all the time. They don't read every book. And so I had one come back, for example, and it showed a devastated major city, and the apocalypse had come, and it had a comment on the cover under the title about the Antichrist. And I wrote back, I said, this is a gripping cover. Book has nothing to do with the Antichrist, and there is no apocalypse in it. So I don't know what book you did it for, but it's an interesting looking cover. How about my cover?
Oh, wow.
They got the wrong idea somewhere. And I don't know if somebody just gave them bad information or what. So you do need to check that. And then you also mentioned the interior design. And so everyone knows what will happen in traditional publishing too is they will send you page proofs. They used to be called galleys. Some people still call them galleys. Technically, they're not. Galleys are long strips of paper when things used to be run through typeset types of printing presses. What you get now is a 8.5 by 11 with your page printed on it to go over, and those are called page proofs. So you're proofing the page, which you want to do too, because occasionally you'll see an error that's in there. Sometimes there's a little computer error, and it'll generate some funky kind of dingbat symbol in the middle of your text. So an extra pair of eyes always helps.
I always feel like when I'm done with the process, you read your book so many times, you're starting to quote it from beginning to end. It's like The Princess Bride, and it just, it's, you live with that book and that novel for a period of weeks / months, oftentimes. And by the time you're done with it, you're like, just get this stupid book away from me. I hate this book. And then it hits shelves and you look at it and you go, it's a good looking book. Pops, I'm not sure if you ever do this. Maybe this is the narcissism in me. You ever pick up your book and just kind of flip to a page and just kind of read a paragraph or two and then judge yourself shamelessly for it? Is it just me?
Yeah, I'm going to have to reveal a little something here. For the longest time, I did not read anything that I'd had published. I refused to do it. Too insecure. Let's be honest about it. I'm an old man now, so I can just throw that kind of stuff out there because I don't care anymore what people think. But I'm really too insecure, and I have not read most of the stuff that I've written once it comes out. Of course, I've read it, I can't tell you how many times when I was writing it and going through the edits and stuff. So seldom have I done that. I had to convert one book to a movie script, so I had to go through it again. That was painful. I listened to one on tape. That was painful for me. Now, because I self-publish anything that goes out of print, just to keep the story alive, I have to go over them again. And so that's forced me to read quite a few things I probably wouldn't have read just because I'm that insecure. So, but it is very fun to have written. It is sometimes a lot of work to write.
Agreed. Well, my agent Dave is in the room, so we should probably talk about agents. But since Dave is here, Pops, why don't you handle it? You can talk about agents.
Well, let's just see how sensitive he is. You know what the word agent comes from? It's from the ancient Latin. It means to slow things down.
Oh, really?
Oh, no.
No, it doesn't. No, not at all.
Like,
it's just an old joke.
Now, I know Latin, but I didn't know that one.
No, I've thought of being an agent several times. No, agents are great things. Okay, so to answer the question, do you need an agent? Not necessarily. I think I sold my first 5 books without an agent. Best way to do that now is to go to writers' conferences and get face-to-face with editors. But it is a little more difficult, and the general flow now in publishing is some publishers won't look at you unless you have an agent. And one reason is they use agents as their first readers. Because what they do, they're saying, okay, the agents has already weeded through a lot of this stuff. They think they can sell this, so it's got more merit than somebody who's just coming to me and I don't know anything about them, just the writer. So do you need an agent? Technically, not necessarily. Is it best to have an agent? Yes. But you need a good agent. No agent is better than a bad agent. So is it best to have an agent? Yes. And here's why. An agent stands in the gap. The agent, ideally, is to help you get published. They have the connections. They know how to talk the lingo. And that leaves you to do the writing, which is the way you want it. So they stand in that gap. And then if things start to go sour, if you have a good agent, then they will stand in the gap to defend you. I've only had that happen once where my agent had to tell a publisher, 1, no, 2, you can forget it, and 3, no one will ever support you in this. And that was the end of that. It was very short and to the point. And the agent was kind of frightening, so he got away with it. But oddly enough, all my none of my early agents ever got a book for me. I think I was on my third agent before the agent actually brought something to me, but that's my fault. I had so much in the pipeline already. Still, an agent will do something else. They're familiar with publishing contracts, and they'll go over your contract. They are not attorneys. Don't expect legal advice. What they will do is tell you, this is what's being done. This is what this term means. This is what they're asking. This is why you don't want to sign this, and I'm going to strike this line out, which happens all the time. Because most boilerplate publishing contracts, you give all your rights about everything and two of your children to the publishing company. A good agent's going to come through and say, no, we're not going to give you full movie rights unless you sell the movie rights yourself. No, you can't have rights to everything. Here's what we're willing to give you. And they know what they can get away with what publisher, because they got a whole file cabinet full of these contracts. They will also oversee other rights and opportunities. They are not going to necessarily sell them. Now, I think, maybe I should just go ahead and say it here. We're talking about literary agents now. There are other types of agents. If you want a movie agent who's going to sell your novel to the movie industry, that's a different agent. Sometimes what agents will do is they will write in the contract you sign with them a 20% fee should they have to involve a Hollywood agent. So what they do is they then split the 20%, each gets 10%. So the literary agent takes care of the books, works with the movie agent who takes care of the production companies. So there is a lot of good that comes from an agent if you have a good agent. And not only that, and this is really the important part, it's fun to say, I was talking to my agent today.
Yeah.
There's just a good feeling with that. I don't know why. A couple of warnings. If any agent wants you to pay money for them to read it, move on. There are groups at organizations that guide agents, and they agree to certain things when they become part of that group, and one is you don't charge reading fees. Some of those are con games. It's very hard to tell. Now, I understand why they do that, and that's because it takes a long time to read, and an agent is, in essence, reading for free to see if you have anything of value. That's why they're so quick to reject. If you don't get them in the first few pages or in the proposal, they're moving on because they've got 50 others sitting by their chair. And then you're going to, just so you know, you're going to pay between 10% and 15% of everything. Now, the standard now is 15%. So the agent is going to be paid 15%. That becomes part of the contract with the publisher, and the publisher will nowadays split the fee. That is, they'll pay 15% to the agent and send the 85% to you. So it doesn't have to go through the agent first. And that's really a better way of doing it. Not always, but that's, to my experience anyway, that's the way it's being done most of the time now. All right, does that make sense so far?
Yes.
It does. It does.
It's been very helpful.
We are running kind of close on time, though, and our last point, I think, is actually very important, and I want to make sure that we have time to get to some of the questions here from the chat room. But this is a thing that people really don't talk about. We've talked about it on the show, but we don't give it a lot of airtime and haven't recently. But writing is very much a business, and you have to manage your business, and you have to think in business terms a lot of times. And we don't like to think about that because this is art. This is our art. We're producing art. But bottom line, if you're signing contracts, you're in business, and you have to do it the right way. So, Pops, do you have just some quick tips and tricks in terms of that?
Yeah, this is the thing about writing for publication. It's not just an art or a craft. It's hardcore business. And don't expect agents to do all that for you. That's really not their job. They will handle placing of the work. They will review contracts. They will deal with disputes, that sort of thing. But the rest of it is going to fall on you. And in truth, you need to manage your agent. Now, your agent's trying to manage his or her authors at the same time. That's just the way it works, and it works quite well that way. But you do have to keep your eye on your agent to in case they overlook something or they miss something in a contract. You raise the question. I did that with my agent one time. I said, "Are you comfortable with this clause?" The guy wrote back and said, "No, I didn't even see that. I don't know how I missed that." Apologized, made the changes. So you want this mutual correcting kind of thing going on. You have to manage your editors, just like the editor feels they have to manage you as a writer. That's the kind of the way it works. So it means that sometimes you're going to have to stick to your guns. And for in research, for example, there's been a couple of times I've had to call editors to task because they wanted to change something that wasn't that didn't need changing. For one, I had a high-rise building, and the editor was just certain that the windows on high-rise buildings are bulletproof. Well, they're not. They shatter into what they call dice. Well, I had done my research on that. In fact, I called a window manufacturing company. So I had to tell them, no, that's not the case. And there have been many other kinds of things like that where I've been challenged on little things. I had an editor change college one of my characters was teaching at because it was in California, and she said nobody likes California colleges.
Wow.
And I said, you don't like Caltech, UCLA, USC? And, well, it was a junior college. He said everybody knows that junior colleges in California are bad. And I said, when was the last time you were in California? I've never been. You ever been to a junior college?
Wow.
No. Know anyone who's been to a California junior college? No. I said, well, you're wrong. There's some of them very, very good. And they need teachers too. So that's, that was a problem. And then another, one of the covers had a cityscape. It's for Wounds. What you see on the cover of Wounds now is the San Diego skyline where this takes place. They had put the skyline from Huntington Beach on it. And I said, that's not San Diego. And they said, yeah, it is. I said, I grew up in San Diego. Spent a lot of time in San Diego. I researched in San Diego. And they go, no, you're wrong. That's San Diego. So what I did is I took a picture off Google and sent it to them. I said, you see that big Ferris wheel you have there? Yeah, that's not San Diego. That's this place here. You see the Barnes and Noble on it's all there. They changed it.
Wow.
Now and I need to explain what happened was they were using clip art, and on the clip art, somebody gave it 2 different city names, including San Diego. But they trusted them more than they trusted me. So I had to, stick to my guns. Sometimes you have to do that. Mm-hmm. But always be professional. Open your ears before you open your mouth. And I like what Ben Bova, who used to be the editor for Analog Science Fiction magazine, Dr. Ben Bova, and I got a rejection from him when I was first starting to write, and I wrote a short story. And it was a forum thing, and it said, don't argue with people who buy ink by the barrel. Mm-hmm. Okay, so these people do know what they're doing. They're not perfect, they're people. So again, is this all your agent's job? Nope, it's not. So check everything. You're the one that's in business. That's part of how the system works.
Yeah. We've done some casts in the past about managing your business as an author. And if you're curious about more on that, please go and search there for some of those. Just look up business and some of those casts will pop up. But that is what we have for this week. We are out of time, but before we go, I do want to see, Molly, do we have any questions from the chat room?
We had a couple of comments. Let me go through it pretty quickly. Dave Fessenden says, Faulkner is the wordiest publisher he knows. Robert Benchley did a parody of Faulkner telling about walking across the kitchen floor and opening the door of a fridge, and it took about 1.5 pages.
It was a different time then.
Yeah. He said on NCIS, they often do the telling of stuff. This is when we were talking about dialogue. He said they often do the telling of stuff other characters already know, but supposedly they only do that when they are talking about the case and kind of just reviewing the information, thinking out loud. Is that realistic? I say generally not in a book, however, because of it being TV and the audience, and they're basically relaying it to each other so we as the audience get that information.
Especially week to week in a serial format last time on NCIS. Now, I've never watched it, but if they have cases that have too much time to do important things, so I'm sorry. I had to I had to get a little dig in there on Molly. If it's one of those where they have cases that go for a couple of weeks and they're referencing something that came up before, they might do that. Well, we already know that so and so did such and such. That's just a way to kind of remind it.
It's so obvious that you've never watched an episode of NCIS because that's not how they do it at all.
Okay, that's fine.
No, like Dave was saying, they'll present it as if the characters already know the information, but the audience doesn't, and it's a brand new case. So they'll repeat.
So they're bringing.
It's like an info dump, character to character info dump for the benefit of the audience. But they do it tastefully. Yeah. That's TV, not novel writing.
Yeah, TV's different than novel writing. I'll say it that way. So TV's different than novel writing. But any other questions?
Questions or comments? Let's see. I asked Andy Klatt how his writing was doing. He said it's coming along pretty well, trying to find time to write. He's finishing up the semester in grad school this week, work and everything else. But he is writing. He's finishing off a baseball book, submitted the manuscript for his Christmas devotional, about to begin editing his Christmas novella that is completed. And he said he has a final exam this evening, but he's at the podcast first. Woo! Way to go, Andy. Way to support.
Nice.
And Dave does have a question. Dave says he writes awfully slow, like about a page an hour. So how do you write 3 pages in an hour? Is there a way to speed that up?
When I do it, that's a page every 20 minutes. And for me to do it on a regular basis, I need to know what's going to happen. I need to go, okay, I'm doing this scene. I'm going to establish this. And then I start, and I watch the clock. So it's 10:20. I have to be done with that page at 10:40. And I just go to town on it. Knowing I'm going to go back and reread it and edit it. But the point is to get the page done. That's the hard work. The editing and rewriting is the fun part. But getting that out of my brain onto paper is sometimes painful. And again, a lot of it depends on how much writing you've done. I once calculated how many pages of mine have been published, and I can't remember what it is now, but I get tired thinking about it. But I have found that simple thing is small efforts over time bring great results, big results. So if you can write, and again, it depends what you're writing. When I'm doing nonfiction, I usually can't do a page every 20 minutes. I can do it with fiction. I can't do it with nonfiction. That's usually about a page every half hour. When I was doing 60 people that shaped the church, 30 events that shaped the church, I was closer to a page an hour.
Wow.
Because I had so much research I had to pull in and look up and do things like that. So the actual physical effort of getting everything on the page was more demanding.
Wow. That's impressive, all of that. Becky Lindsay says, as writers building a platform, we write more than just our novels. She is currently writing articles, blog posts, guest posts, and not speaking of promotion. So her goal is 2,500 words a week on her second YA novel. Is that goal too light?
2,500 words a week?
No, 2,500 a week on her novel, in addition to the articles, the blog posts, the guest posts, and the social media promotions.
500 words a day, so it's a page and a half a day. So it's gonna take you a year to do that.
Yeah,
depending on the size book you're writing, but yeah, traditional size books say it's gonna take you a year unless you're writing an epic fantasy.
It's young adult, so it'll be a little shorter.
Okay, so yeah, probably less than a year. Then I do want to speak to that, but go ahead, Aaron. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, again, this comes back to what works best for you, but I really do think it's an issue of priorities. I was also producing a lot of content, blog, guest blogging, writing curriculum on the education side, doing a lot of that stuff, editing. And so I was doing a lot of words in a week. Very few of it was my words, the words that I wanted to write. And so I had to shift my priorities. If that's working for you and you're working at a pace that you're comfortable with, I mean, go for it. But if you're feeling like, the priority is really to get this book done and get it polished up and sent out, maybe you want to try and slide that scale a little bit more to where you're even maybe just 3,000 a week or something, or maybe this week it's 3,000, maybe next week it's 3,200, whatever the case may be. But again, it's really just going to be a personal decision that you have to make.
Yeah, I'm going to be the Grinch on this, and because I see this so often in dealing with people becoming writers, that so often we get caught up in the social media that we don't write. We spend more time on social media than we do on the writing. If you want to write a book, that has to be your priority. Everything else is a distraction. Now, I'm not saying you can't write the occasional blog post, but more and more I'm seeing people who want to break into writing. They want me to help them do that, but they will spend more hours on the social media than they will on their book.
I have to quit the podcast now.
Well, I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm going to do that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Hang on, I'll get to you in a minute.
Okay.
No, but I'm seeing this trend, and it can happen to anyone anytime. I like to do make videos, and I've got a whole list of things I want to do on those, but I've had to realize that I can do that or I can write. And that's become my little statement. Well, I can do this or I can write. Now, which is the one that I need to do? What is it that freshens my soul, makes me feel alive? And it's not going to be a blog post for me. At the time, if you write a blog post and you use 500 words on a blog post, okay, and you do that every day, it's 2,500 words. And if you carry that over 10 weeks, how many pages would you have done in your novel?
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Was that the right answer? Yeah. A lot.
Yeah, it is. It is a matter of priorities. We are very distracted people in the 21st century, and I'm horrible about it. I've been that way my whole life, so it's been a constant battle for me. But I have noticed that when I wanted to get serious about writing, and I wanted to catch up because I started late, I messed things up, which is a whole other story. That had to become my priority. So I'd do my job. I would head home, and then I had a specific number of minutes, hours, depending how old the kids were at the time, that I'd be writing.
I love, Pops, how you call it the social media. I don't think you've ever sounded older. On the social media.
I don't recall saying that, but
kind of is. Yeah, you did.
Okay, well,
but that's okay.
Doesn't matter, you whippersnappers.
So moving on.
Yeah.
I had a question when we were talking about scheduling. As a new writer, you're talking about scheduling. My question is, do you have to set a specific time, or can you set a goal? That is, I will write for half an hour every morning versus I will write 3 pages before bedtime. Which is the better option?
We come back to whatever works for you. I work on goals. I prefer goals over specific times.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on your schedule. How consistent is your schedule? My schedule is very consistent. Usually, I mean, I know I'm teaching, 6-7 hours a day. I know I'm going to get up and work out and get into work early, and I know I'm going to stay late. I know I'm going to eventually have some meetings, but I can schedule my writing in between those moments of quiet time that I have throughout the day. I can do that. But some people are working swing shift and night shift and other things like that. If their schedule's changing from week to week, they can't say, I'm going to write every day at 3. So it really just depends on you. The goal, I think, as long as you're working off of a goal, then you should be okay.
Very cool. Thank you for that. Last question. Jacqueline Patterson wants to know, would you recommend smaller presses over larger presses? She is still wavering.
I've got my opinion on this, Pops. I'm going to let you go first.
I think, in honor of Little League Baseball this week, World Series, I think every writer should swing for the fences. I'm not saying there's something wrong with small presses. There's always been a history of literary presses and the like, and the large houses cannot always take the kind of book you write. That's also the advantage of self-publishing. You can write whatever you want because you're not doing it for a living. But I think if it would appeal to a traditional publisher, you owe yourself a shot at that. Otherwise, I just got a feeling that towards the end of the writing career, you're going to think, man, I wish I'd given that a shot.
I agree. It also depends on your life circumstances, etc. I've got a day job and it pays my bills, and I'm happy about that. So I can go with the little guys, and I'm not trying to feed my family with my writing money. If I were trying to feed my family with my writing money, I would be a little more locked into trying to lock up the advances and trying to get some of the bigger houses so that maybe my sales numbers might be a little bit better, etc. But that being said, all of my novels have been with smaller traditional publishers, but more of the kind of new market indie publishers. And I've been super happy with all of them in the process.
Remember, John Grisham started with a small house.
Did he?
Yeah, he got rejected over and over again. Nobody wanted his book, Time to Kill.
Oh, wow.
And he got an agent. The agent said, we'll start the second book. We'll see what we can do with this. And I believe it was Revell out of Ventura, maybe. The small house. And they published it. And then a big publisher picked it up. Came in and snagged it.
Wow.
And that launched his career. The Firm, I think, was the second book.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes starting with a small publisher will open a door to a larger publisher. But there's drawbacks with larger publishers too.
Such as?
Oh,
they take a lot longer.
Yeah, they take a lot longer. And you can be just a source of material for them. You're a content provider. You're not necessarily an artist. If you hit it big, then you're providing lots of money. Stephen King changed publishers because he walked in one of his publishers to meet with somebody. Nobody knew who he was.
Yeah.
How do you not know who he is?
I don't know. His editor certainly knew, but the publishing house was so big. One more story. I know we're way over, but here's one quick story. I was at a retreat setting, and one of the guys was in the bunkhouse we were in. Was an actor, and he was doing a lot of acting on the daytime soaps and nighttime soaps. He did other acting too, and that's how he made it his living. We started talking about agents, and I asked him what house he was with, and he said, well, he mentioned a very big house. It happened to be the house I was with. I thought that was great. He said, well, I left them. I have this one agent here, and he's just one guy. I don't even think he has a secretary. It's just him. And I said, why would you leave the nation's largest agency to go to a one-person agent? And the answer was really quite simple. He says, because when a producer calls this big agency and they say, I'm looking for somebody, he's got to be in the mid-30s, 6'2", leading man type, with some good experience acting, slim, good build. And the big agency will say, okay, I'll send 5 or 6 over to you right away. When they call the small agency, they say the same thing, and the agent goes, I got just the guy for you. And that was different. He says, I was a fish in a very big sea. I went to him, and I am the biggest fish in the pond. And it worked out for him.
Yeah.
Well, he hated acting, but that's another story. Yeah.
It's nice to be able to contact the publishers directly, from my experience, and be able just to shoot them an email. Head of the company, shoot them an email. Hey, here are my thoughts. To get emails from them. Hey, what are you thinking? I got an email from one. When are you going to write another thriller, suspense novel? And I said, I've got this idea. What do you think? And he says, great. Here's an outline that we like to use if you find it helpful. And it's just emailing back and forth. And
wow,
that's nice. If I was with, Random House, fat chance. So smaller presses sometimes are able to move a little bit quicker. They're invested in you, in your success as an author, because their success as a publisher is usually dependent upon it. And so it's a nice, it's a partnership. It's a partnership. So I've had great experiences. Yeah. So, but yeah, again, I think, Pops, you said swing for the fences. I agree with that. Give yourself a shot to go for some of the big boys. Jacqueline, especially you. make sure that you're swinging for those fences, because you've got a really good shot of hitting it out of the park. And so that's what I would recommend for you. So we are way over on time. Molly, thanks for handling the chat room. Everyone in the chat room, what a great interaction you guys had today. Love having you there. Some great questions and comments. Next week, or again, I keep saying next week, next show, next time, which will be on September 5th, we're going to be talking about the proper care and feeding of your story idea. So we hope that you'll join us for that. So until then, thank you all for listening, and good writing.